Good evening from the library. Um, I'm going to dive right in response to Karen's prompt. I know we had 3 articles this week. Karen didn't give us any questions necessarily, just asked us to talk about how we got on with the readings and what we thought. I am going to be brutally honest and say I didn't enjoy the readings this week. I thought that they covered pretty much stuff that we've already covered in the past couple of weeks. Just sort of a summary of a few different models and examples. Obviously, I didn't personally. I didn't think they were well written. The first two, I didn't enjoy. I thought the Abe's article was really back and forth, like jumping between. It was just hard to read, really, if I'm being honest. I thought the Cirillo article was really, it spoke about a lot of the same things. The Weber article for me was the best of the three. It was, I thought the flow was better. It was easier for me to read, it was more enjoyable. It was clearer. But I think that being the third article, I was kind of identity development to doubt by that stage. But here we go. Anyway, nonetheless. The Abe's article, the first one, was, as I said, it was difficult to read, but I thought really just continued the idea of how much is socially constructed. I know Karen touched on how years ago we did so much to differentiate people, and this is how we're different, and then nowadays we're going back to saying, well, this is how we're related, and this, that, and the next. I thought obviously there was a lot of there were some examples and stories in it, but I really I took a lot. Just how much of it's socially constructed is incredible. So much is pre-perceived and predetermined, and how people should act and how people should be depending on what they are, what they look like, and we immediately just categorise people, and touched on gender identity, which I found interesting. I think just looking here at my notes, Taylor and Whittier, 1992, had a 3-step process about the model about lesbian identity, the construction of boundaries, the emergence of shared consciousness, and the processes of politicization. Yes, was one of the models discussed. The processes that was interesting to me. I think just the way that the different struggles and difficulties with that people who associate, people who identify as lesbian, when they're developing their identity, that was an interesting perspective, an interesting model, or to read the 3 processes. The model of multiple dimensions of identification was. I liked it because it took into account the context and the situation. I'm just going to have it here. I don't want to copy it because all the rings look like Saturn on crack, but but I thought it was interesting that, as I said, because it takes into account the environment and the context, which is so important. I know the article talked a lot about. In fact, it was the Weber article talked a bit more about how history plays a part, the environment plays a part, the context, the situation. So I thought the model of multiple dimensions of identification and the Weber article, I thought they tied in nicely with each other. Just about how when you're developing identity, it really depends on so many things that are surrounding you and your influences. So I thought those 2 things tied in nicely with each other. You know, as I said, if you were if you were developing your identity as for example, a transgender individual, I think it would really depend on where in the country you were, what your influences were, what your surroundings were, as to how you were able to develop that identity. So I think the model that I previously listed, I think, and also the Weber text nicely touch on that point. The Cerullo, turns out it's not Jason Cerullo, Jason Derulo's brother. The Cerullo article, I shouldn't joke. The Cerullo article, as I said, I think talked about a lot of the same stuff as we've either already read in previous weeks, or we read in the first article. But again, the 9 axes of constructed domains was interesting, I guess. The adolescent sexual identification. Again, it discusses the influential factors, which I think is huge, especially with adolescents. The kind of support system you've got, the kind of environment you're in, is so key to how you identify, how you develop your identity, and what you identify with, and how comfortable you are and able to. It made me think about how many adolescents are juggling with their sexuality and not able to identify with, you know, or develop the identity that they want or they feel that they are, due to their surroundings or their family or their influences in school or their friends or whatever. So that made me think about that a little bit. What else did I have in my notes? Yeah, Irving also explores the cultural differences and social locations, as I said earlier. The location where you are in the country, where you are you in the city? Are you are you outside of the city? Rural or urban? Obviously, I think is a huge factor as well. If you were to take New York City, I think we've used it a few times in class. If you were to compare New York City to Valdosta, I think that there's a huge difference. So I think the differences that Irving explores in their model, if you like, or piece in the Cerullo text is interesting. Another piece, I guess, was really relevant to today is the technology and identity. It's discussed by Joshua Merowitz. I know there's 3 different dates, starting from 1985. I think it's really the social interaction. I think the idea that now we're not only examining and able to look at people's identities, but people are also developing a virtual identity. Someone behind the face of a keyboard is a very different person to who they are in real life. And you only have to look at YouTube comments and Facebook profiles and all these different dating agencies and stuff. Somebody can be who they can identify or develop an identity that's much different from the identity that they actually truly have in real life, which is good and bad. Sometimes it allows someone to be who they really want to be, and maybe it eases them into development. Maybe if someone was identifying with, again, going back to sexuality, if they were in the process of coming out, maybe they were able to explore different virtual or things online before they took the step to do it in real life, if you like. So I thought that was interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about the Weber text because I'm approaching 10 minutes, but the promotion of positive interaction was one of the biggest parts that I took from that article. I think it's so important, the positive interaction, and also, as I said before, the context, situation, the history, geographical location, and your surroundings are so important when we're talking about identity development, whether it be gender, sexuality, racial, whatever it is. I think so. They were pretty much my thoughts. I didn't enjoy them, but obviously there are pieces that were interesting. The Weber text was the most interesting for me. But hopefully will spark some debate in class, and I'll see different opinions on this week's readings. So that's it. Good night.